Good evening and welcome to the Dark Ozarks.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, Josh. Hey, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great evening and a great week. And we are rushing headlong towards Halloween and using it as an excuse to talk more about ghosts.
On one hand, Halloween can't get here fast enough, but on the other hand, I want the Halloween season to last as long as humanly possible.
Exactly. Same.
It is, without a doubt, my favorite time of the year. I think it is yours as well. And in part because October in the Ozarks is typically gorgeous.
It is. It is a beautiful time of year. And it just is very evocative. And so many of the things that we talk about in the Dark Ozarks just seem to resonate.
They do. And I think many people really get to thinking about the paranormal or the supernatural this time of year. And for a little bit, everyone can be almost as cool as us on a regular basis.
Speaking of cool, let's go ahead and mention our sponsors.
Absolutely.
The podcast is sponsored by two wonderful sponsors.
Mhm.
Always Buying Books in Joplin, Missouri, which is phenomenal for its inventory. Go check them out in person or online at their website, alwaysbuyingbooks.com, or on Facebook and get what you need sent to you. And then our other sponsor being Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, Missouri, which is phenomenal ale, food, and they're the only English style pub in Missouri and have been named the best brewery in Missouri 2 years running by the Missouri Brewers Association.
Which is really, really phenomenal and a great product.
Yeah.
And in both cases, what I think is interesting, both locations, Always Buying Books in Joplin and the Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, are both haunted.
Yeah, see that's just a bonus for us.
We've done, between all of us, we've done survey investigations and investigations in both locations now.
Yes.
Incredible results for me, I thought, in Alba at the Beard Engine Brewing Company, and great folks all around. Also, follow Always Buying Books and friends of Always Buying Books on Facebook. Bob posts fantastic stuff, and plus it's just entertaining. And I saw the gnome book for sale, and then I saw it was sold. And I just these hard to find titles. Now, I'm a huge fan of the gnome book. I have a copy. It's been in my family since about 1979. And interestingly enough, just as a shout out to Always Buying Books, because I saw Bob posted that today, the gnome book has certainly been instrumental in my appreciation of folklore and the paranormal.
Yes. And it's one of those things that, I also follow Beard Engine Brewing Company on Facebook as well.
Yes.
And you'll have an opportunity, people have an opportunity to come out and meet us and look at some of these cool, rare books that Bob has on the paranormal and the supernatural coming up soon.
Yes, 100%. Very excited. So I need to go check on my puppy for a moment. If you will take our upcoming calendar of events, and then we will get back with Hollister in just a second.
Will do. So we have several things coming up in the Halloween season. This Friday, October 7th, 2022, we will be having a haunted walking tour in downtown Hollister, Missouri. Tickets for all of the events that I'm going to list are available at paranormalsciencelab.com. And tickets are selling through, so get yours before they are sold out. There we are going to tour the very beautiful, very haunted Ye Olde English Inn as well as tour downtown Hollister with all the stories, ghost stories. And then we are going to end up at the Turkey Creek Brewing Company and have Ozark related folk songs as well as refreshments and food available. So it's going to be a great time. Then on October 15th, we will be in Joplin for a day-long event, Dark Ozarks October Country, which is going to be at the VFW off of North Main. It is also a haunted location. And we are going to be covering a lot of subjects that we talk about on Dark Ozarks, as well as have other panelists there for an interactive day that will include the audience. And there will also be merchandise available, including books and other things, and refreshments and food.
Very excited about that. And I'm happy to say that I'm back and I found my dog. I had lost him in my own house.
Well, see, it happens.
Yes, he went through a portal. Actually just locked himself in my bedroom closet.
Sounds like him.
It does. And then on October 29th, we will be in
Actually,
Newtonian,
20th.
Missouri. What's that?
20th.
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 Yes.
And then that one, yeah. On October 20th, we will be in Joplin for the Downtown Joplin Flashlight Walking Tour. We'll be covering a lot of the history, ghost stories of the downtown Joplin area. We are doing that in conjunction with the Joplin Downtown Alliance, which is also putting on the Third Thursday Art Walk that night. And they are also very instrumental in various historic building restorations. So proceeds benefit them there. And now the 29th.
Now the 29th will be in Newtonian, Missouri at the Ritchie Mansion, the community center across the street, and the Civil War Cemetery for what is really going to be, I suspect, a very big night.
I think so too. It's proving up to be a big night, and it's every time we're there, it's a great event. Lots of history, a little bit of ghost hunting and demonstration, and a tour of the Civil War cemetery. And there's going to be food and refreshments this time for the first time, and I'm not even sure what all they're doing yet. So they haven't given me the full itinerary yet. So it looks to be a good event. And then November 19th, we have two events. We will be in the afternoon at Always Buying Books for a book signing for you and I.
Yes.
And then that night, we will be at the Webb City Library for a tour in investigation. And it also is a very active location with a lot of history, and it benefits the library. So
yes, it does. And so many of these events do benefit the locations as well. And that is one of the things that's most exciting to me, that having these opportunities for the public to come together is also an opportunity to help these historic locations.
yes. And on that note, we have some things to talk about.
Oh, Gravity Road, Crybaby Bridge, and other death omen tropes in the Ozarks and elsewhere. There's a lot to dig into. So where would you like to dive in? We had a fun beginning of this conversation over on YouTube Live, and we would encourage people to go over to YouTube to check out everything that's archived there.
Well, there are a lot of ghost tales that involve bridges, rivers, and roads. And I think there's various reasons for that. Some practical, some more literary and folkloric. For one, these are all places that people tend to be at times sort of, the lonely traveler, or they're by themselves, and bad things can happen. And maybe help is not there to save the day.
Right. It is also these are liminal spaces.
Yes, and I think that is some of sort of the magic of these stories, is that whether it's conscious or subconscious, we are drawn to those boundary areas. Um, you know, and just like the motif of the crossroads being very important in folklore, roads in general, because you were traveling, and it's usually a line between the known and the unknown in a lot of these stories. Rivers the same way, and
Yeah.
bridges, definitely you're crossing that space.
Yes.
And I don't think it's by accident that you have a lot of ghost tales associated with rivers and bridges. Particularly,
Oh.
we've had this trope, this idea in folklore, mythology, and earlier religion for thousands of years, and that would be the ferryman.
It is. So let's start there, and then that reminds me of a personal experience that I had 2 years ago this month, which is odd. As with many of my experiences, it's more of an impression or an odd take on something rather than something documented.
Uh-huh.
But oh, you go back to Greco-Roman mythology, to the ferryman and the river Styx.
Yes. And he guided the dead to the
Yes.
underworld.
And something that you do see in more ancient cultures typically is a more nuanced relationship with death.
Yes. Yes. And different mythology that deals with this. Either sometimes there's a riddle that the deceased has to answer to get to the other side, or you have to pay the ferryman.
Yes.
That there is a price. There is a price to be paid that in some way is tangible through the process of death and going to the other side of the veil, basically.
Yes. And something that I think we often overlook, particularly in terms of folkloric understanding, is how much Greco-Roman belief continues to impact our ideas today.
Oh, I think very much so. That there's an underscore of Greco-Roman mythology, as well as Norse mythology, that I think that we've internalized as a broader culture, and often are just simply unaware that that's where it's coming from.
Yes. And we have, I'm reminded, I was listening to, so for people who might be unfamiliar, I listen to YouTube podcasts on cryptids, folklore, demonology, and particularly old world or European mythologies to fall asleep to, as well as ghost stories. Preferably looking for ones that have a decently long running time without like ads every 15 minutes, because I don't like getting jarred awake by a Verizon commercial in the middle of my, as I'm falling asleep to the life and times of the goddess Diana. But something that I was just listening to recently was a treatise on Hecate, and that she was the goddess of crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that particularly fascinating because, Crossroads lore, as we've already mentioned, is steeped within culture. It's steeped within hoodoo culture in particular in the Deep South, which is something that you wouldn't necessarily, you find references to this this belief structure where you wouldn't necessarily be looking for acolytes of the goddess Hecate.
Very true. Very true. Touche.
And as you mentioned with Norse mythology and Germanic mythology, Odin, and particularly the wild hunt, the motif of that works its way into all sorts of things, particularly in the upcoming season as we near the winter solstice, and is echoed, interestingly enough, in Ghost Riders in the Sky.
Yes, very true. Very true.
One of my favorite cowboy songs. Actually, it is my favorite cowboy song.
Yes, and most people, when they hear that song, that's the last thing they're thinking of.
Right, they're not thinking of ancient winter solstice Nordic lore, or and Germanic, depending on which side of the Baltic Sea that you're on.
True, but I think the fact that these tropes and these motifs surrounding these types of places, going back so far so that they are an unconscious incorporation in our view
Psyche.
of things, in our psyche. Yes,
it is.
I think lends itself to why some of the more modern incarnations of these types of stories have found resonance.
I agree. So, do we want to start with the crybaby bridge trope?
Sure, why not?
So, and for people who are unfamiliar with crybaby bridge, now there's a couple of aspects. There's maybe a number of people who are unfamiliar with the legend. There also may be a number of people who could be getting all excited saying, oh my goodness, you're getting ready to talk about my crybaby bridge, and we're potentially about to burst your bubble.
Yes, potentially, yes. Crybaby bridges are probably the second most common trope that we encounter, the first being the suicidal Indian princess. But
yes, she just kept throwing herself off that cliff
further and further west all the time. But there are crybaby bridges in every state, just like there are the suicidal Indian princess, and some states have a number of them. I do not have one in my immediate area per se. There's some down in Oklahoma.
Yes.
There is a bridge just over the Kansas line that has some similar lore, but it's not per se a baby crying. And you're being attacked.
Oh, I have a little now that bridge in Oklahoma. All right, are you referencing the Devil's Promenade?
No. I'm talking about the Crybaby Bridge.
Okay,
yeah. And it was discussed when we were in Caney.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Devil's Promenade Bridge, I think, is a analogous kind of trope that happens in various places, but does not involve crying. It involves horse hoofbeats.
Yes, and the devil, of course,
and the devil. The devil came along a little later in the story, but with the settlers. But It's just it's kind of hard to know which came first, the cart or the horse there, or the devil or the horse. I'm not sure, but
Which came first, the devil or the egg?
yeah, that's a quandary.
So we'll be hatching things later, but not
I
this
knew you
month.
were going to. I knew you were going to do that.
Oh, don't hate me. I'm recently hatched. But I survived my basset hound attack, so I'm feeling pretty cheeky right now.
There you go.
So, and I think, starting with Crybaby Bridge and work back, as you mentioned earlier, on the pre-episode, and basically our teaser trailer, there's something about Crybaby Bridge that is inextricably linked to automobile culture.
There is the more dominant version of the story definitely is, and that version is there's a tragic accident, and a baby is killed in the accident, and
Yes.
sometimes the mother as well.
Yes.
And so you have these tales that the crying that you hear is of the baby, and sometimes there's a separate ghostly appearance of the mother who's searching for the baby, but not all the time. And I think there's two components. I think the crying tends to be from whatever wildlife is there, whether it be big cat or something else,
Or an owl.
or an owl. We don't need to devolve into big cat fights.
Let the Black Panther Wars commence, the Great Black Panther Wars of 2022.
Once again.
Yeah.
And
in short, we hear you, we see you. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
We
do
validate you.
acknowledge. Yes.
Yes.
And so and so logistically, I think that's where a lot of these stories come from, because people hear these calls around these bridges.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly bridges that had a number of tragic accidents, they coalesce into, oh my gosh, you're hearing the cries of this lost child. And then it usually then evolves into the mother looking for the child.
Right. Which,
But oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's points of crossover with so many different bits and pieces of folkloric elements.
Yeah.
And the one that really comes to mind just at this moment is the legend of the lost child in the cavern.
Yeah.
With the mother going to seek the child, and then both of them being lost.
Yes. And there's a number of those stories. And I think, also there are some bridges that have these sort of tales that originally the tale was about someone leaping from the bridge and dying. Yes. Or someone being murdered. There's one in Northwest Arkansas that's connected to the tale of a husband killing the wife and child.
Yes.
And then what you're hearing is the child crying and sounds of the mother looking for the child. And that predates automobiles.
Yes.
That is one that has not evolved into a car-related one, but some of these, and probably more than we're aware of, I suspect, started out as those kinds of stories. And then when car culture came in, it's like, oh my gosh, someone, that bridge has so many horrible wrecks that it then evolved into, it was a car wreck.
Right. Now, I think this is, there's something I want to land on here with this topic and get your thoughts on this, and then possibly transition to Vengeful Spirits.
Okay.
And just as a segue. But the something that seems to be consistent with these sort of super regional tropes is a situation where it is an area where, for example, either something really bad took place, or a single incident. First of all, a single incident that impacted the entire community, so much so that it worked its way into the consciousness of the following generations, where the facts were not as well preserved as the trauma.
Yes, and I think that happens in cases of, say, train wrecks, riverboat crashes and sinkings, and just some of the major kind of accidents that people say, oh, how could this happen? And I do think that details get lost, and then but sort of the feelings that are left behind, the impressions, are what develop into the folklore.
It does. Now, certainly I think that in the face of whether it's for a larger community or a smaller community, the Arkansas tragedy, which is documented,
Yes.
of the father murdering his wife and child,
Mm-hmm.
For that community, it had to have left that immediate community just with a sense of, how could this happen?
Exactly. And you don't see it coming. That's I think another component of this, of where the folklore really develops. It's a situation where even if it's a foreseeable thing, such as a car wreck, how could it happen here or to us?
Right. And within that, there's, first of all, there's a lot of understandable phases of trauma and grief that are attached to this, and I think it is a common, it's part of the human experience. We tell stories to try to make sense of the world when it doesn't make sense.
Right. And so post World War II, such a common experience is car culture. And I think that's,
and consequently car accidents.
Yes, and I think that's where a lot of that comes from. And then also the second sort of trope in these, usually around a bridge,
Yes.
Is the gravity, basically a gravity hill type scenario, where the legend goes that if you put your car in neutral, it's going to roll uphill.
Yes.
And there are fingerprints on the back of the car, and so it's ghosts have pushed it. Often this happens on a dirt road or a gravel road, which,
right,
by the way, takes up a lot of dust.
Yeah.
And what most people don't think about, unless you just washed your car, every time you've opened your trunk, you have left the natural oils from your skin on your trunk lid. So you're going to have finger impressions there that are going to be highlighted when it gets dusty.
So you're at a disappointing moment of debunking. You might, if you have actually experienced this, you might be terrified at your own handprints from when you put the groceries in earlier that day.
Right. Or the kids playing around the back of the car or something like that. And so, that's something that gets, people going, because it's something they can actually see. The other part of it is the rolling uphill, which typically is an optical illusion, that you're actually on a decline rather than an incline.
Yes.
But the lay of the land around it makes you think that it's uphill.
And I think the first, certainly the internet has gone a long way to perpetuate some of these.
Yes. I mean, there's a handful of them around the country that were fairly prominent before the internet. I know there's one in Florida and a couple of others. They got talked about quite a bit, but the internet certainly proliferated it, I think.
And that's actually where I first read the story. It was in the comparatively early days of the internet. And I don't remember, it was, I think, a location in Texas, if memory serves. But of course, bear in mind, this was like 2005. And, you know, drive your car to this railroad track crossing, put it in neutral, sit in the dark. And if I remember correctly, the ghosts of the children who had been killed in the school bus accident on the railroad track would push your car over the tracks.
Yeah.
And leave their footprint. I said it again. Leave their handprints on the bag. Yeah, not their footprints. They're not pushing it with their toes. Leave their footprints in the back of the car. And the thing that was struck me, and of course, this was almost 20 years ago, when I heard the story, it was a new story to me. Because I was in my rather sheltered existence in Central Illinois, pre-internet. I wasn't being told any of these stories, and all of the ghost stories that I grew up with were homegrown and actually had first-person experiences associated with them, which was kind of fun.
Right.
But then also that the thing that I think made it eerie was the specificity. There were GPS coordinates. It was this crossroad at this railroad track where this accident had taken place.
Right. And that is a neat thing about it. And of course, the reason for that is typically because it is literally you're rolling downhill, even though you may not think you are. It has to happen on that particular spot on the road.
Yeah. And I think in some cases, the relative specificity, in some cases, just a road, but a specific road. In the case of the Branson area, it's Sycamore Church Road, which, there's a lot of road to choose from, but still in the grander scheme of the entire nation, that's quite specific. It's a
Right.
real road with a real name. That is, I think, lends an air of credibility to the story.
Yeah.
In people's minds, without that moves them away from the idea that this is just a legend. It's a legend that is functioning within the space of, but we think it's real.
Right. Exactly. And again, these are typically post World War II stories.
Yeah.
And I think in part because with a horse and buggy, it's not going to work even at the same spot, and because you can't put the horse in neutral and let it roll.
Mm-hmm.
And so without
awfully
car
hard to
culture,
do.
it wouldn't happen.
Yes. Now, jumping over to actual paranormal cases, what I think would be interesting as a comparison, when there is, for example, a tragic death, particularly of a child in historic terms, in some cases, the apparition is associated with the approximate location.
Yes, that's true. And if it's something that we have details on, it's you can say we know this person, this event happened here. So that's very interesting. Ironically, the only sort of baby crying story that I know of, and we've talked about this, is actually at Peace Church Cemetery. And I don't
Yeah.
actually, even though it is a phenomena that happens, we think, it's probably more, imprint in the environment, stone tape theory, that rather than a haunting from a death, because
Yes.
we believe that the person that was the baby that was crying is still living.
Right, which is such an odd concept to work your way through.
It is. But in that instance, one thing that does happen there, or people have reported for a long time, hearing a baby crying.
Yes. Now,
And no,
I was just gonna, in your investigations, whether it's been able to be documented to a specific death or incident, have you encountered the phenomena personally?
of what, a baby crying?
Of a baby crying or disembodied?
Yes, I have, in a couple of instances where there were sounds of a baby or a small child crying.
Okay.
But they've been at places where there's been a lot of activity and a lot of things happen. So it would make sense even if we couldn't identify the particular child.
Right. Now, jumping to the Peace Church Cemetery, I mean, one theory is that just the immense outlay of emotion
Mhm.
can cause a ripple that
Right.
essentially records certain moments that replay themselves over and over. Now, I mean, and that's one theory. The other that I wonder about is if certain areas, not really the outlay of emotion or the explosion of emotion, but this certain places, for whatever reason, have a tendency, just an innate, like something about the geologic structure, to do that phenomena.
I think so. Or another way of explaining that is being talked about a lot in the field is that basically on a quantum physics level, that basically a certain point of time kind of bleeds through.
Mhm.
And so that, quote, it's not something lingering or necessarily imprinted in the environment, but under certain circumstances, we are experiencing our present as well as an overlay of an event that's already happened.
Yes, and now the theory in terms of emotional or energetic output oftentimes becomes associated with battlefields.
Battlefields, or say a murder victim, something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. But then other places just seem to exhibit that phenomena without necessarily an inciting incident.
That's true. Sometimes just places that had a lot of contact with people, period, and not
Mhm.
necessarily that intense, dramatic moment of violence.
Yes.
Hmm.
So it's now we do know, jumping over the Peace Church Cemetery, in the proximity of Peace Church, there was a lot of violence.
There was. I mean, actually, before it was a cemetery, well, before it became a formal cemetery, there have been burials there. Actually, the first known burials in the county took place there, um, just on open land. But during the Civil War, there was extensive massacre, not far away, less than a quarter mile away, and ultimately a 5 mile radius where all the houses were burned, and victims, soldiers and a civilian from the massacre were buried in unmarked grave on the land that became the cemetery.
Yes. And so, I mean, in these situations, it can be difficult to pinpoint. Now, of course, coming back with and this is first of all, it's a common this is a common folkloric theme. If you're familiar with Supernatural, it is a very common theme through many seasons. But really just sort of moving in addition to the Crybaby Bridge motif. So basic idea, there's a tragic death and there's one or more lingering spirits at this location. Then the next step, which of course is we're moving into Halloween territory really quickly here, is that because of the tragic death, the spirits who remain are seeking justice and or vengeance, and they may or may not be able to distinguish you, the person who stumbled onto the bridge, etc., or within the space, from perhaps the perpetrator of their murder.
Right, basically lashing out at whoever's there.
Yes, and I think that a lot of unspoken fear about ghosts is associated with this particular folkloric trope.
I think so, and it's predicated on the assumption that, one, you have this ghost, but they either don't have self-awareness of the surroundings, etc., to distinguish between who wronged them or who is a threat and who isn't.
Yes, so their spider senses are off, and it's the sort of the idea that you're moving into the space is a little like sticking your hand in the box and you don't know what might bite you.
Exactly, or exactly what you're going to encounter. And I think it's also worth noting, I think that the assumption is you have no defense.
Correct.
You know, people often just assume that you can't do anything to a ghost, but they can to you.
Right. So you're really at their mercy. You're at their, you're in their space. And and I think that's when you have the situation, especially whether it's spoken or not. I think that this trope has worked its way into the psyche. And then, for example, if you're on, hosting a tour, etc., and somebody gets touched and they come unglued,
yeah,
that's probably what's running through their head, whether they fully consciously realize it or not.
Yes, that is true, and that is the one thing that startles people the most, is if they get touched, they get their hair pulled, they get their shirt tugged or something like that. And I've had adults, men and women, who have latched onto me when something like that happened to me and not let go for the rest of the evening. So
yes. And I think
assuming that I guess I somehow have ghost armor. I don't know.
It's an interesting shift in perspective, over the years that we've been working together, which is a number at this point. Really transitioning, which in all fairness, it wasn't a difficult transition for me. But the idea that, being touched by a disembodied spirit isn't that much different than, accidentally bumping into somebody at the, line at Walmart.
No, or walking down the sidewalk. No, I mean, and to be perfectly honest, my experience is it's pretty much, like that. And usually when you do get touched, it's very playful. And typically child spirits tend to do it more than anything, almost that curiosity, really they're, I've only had a handful of instances that I really felt that it was, I guess you'd say, an adult spirit, and certainly fewer that had an intention other than curiosity.
Yes. Now, just in terms of more documentable lore, what are your thoughts on the idea of vengeful spirits?
I think there are a handful that really fall into that category.
Mhm.
And I think the ones that make the best lore and make the most sense for that tend to be ones who either pronounced a curse on someone before they died, or swore vengeance, that they were, I'll get you. Giles Corey at the Salem witch trials is a good example. You know, cursing his executioners, and that they would all see his fate within a year, and to a fault they did.
Mm.
Now that makes a great story.
It does. It does.
And certainly it's in a situation where you can understand why someone would do that. I think
Mhm.
another famous example would be, say, the Bell Witch story.
Yes. And I think the the Bell Witch is worth digging into a little bit in association. Obviously, Tennessee is not part of the Ozarks, but the bulk of the Ozarks was heavily settled by Tennessee settlers.
Yes, and in the events surrounding that were, occurred right as settlers started coming into this area from that area.
And I think even Andrew Jackson had some sort of association with the Bell Witch.
There is a tale that he was at the property once, and that he had an encounter, and that he saw her, or something. Yeah, I'd have to go back and read it, but yes, there is and he repeated that to other people.
I think what I think, and I've watched and listened to a number of podcasts and documentaries on Bell Witch. I've not been to the cavern. I've not been to the location. I would like to go.
I have not either as of yet.
But I think what's interesting about it is it's more strongly documented in terms of a location associated with witchcraft type activity, as opposed to another trope which shows up consistently, which is the witch's grave, or yes, that's a witch's house, or it's a witch's graveyard. These types of things that people will start swearing up by, but there is much less documentation that you see with, for example, the Bell Witch or Salem, these types of things.
Exactly. No, I agree with you. And there's one near Carthage, Missouri, that is evolving as we speak. We had people talking about it on the page the other day, and I was conversing with the woman that it's a younger woman who she'd heard this in high school, and the story is only maybe 20 years old at best. That and it's the Witch's Road, and there was a witch's house. The chimneys are still there, but it's very, very well documented. It was a farm, and then through the 30s and 40s became a summer motor camping site, which was not uncommon. And then over time, just fell into disuse, and the cottages and the house are gone, and a couple of chimneys left. And everyone always referred me, when I was growing up, it was the old coal brick farm. It's cool looking, but then suddenly over the last few years, it's the Witch's Road.
Yeah, and it, in a very common, I think, across the nation, and not just limited to the United States. I think just a very common motif, an abandoned house, or a nearly abandoned house with an elderly person living in it. We almost get this hints of this in To Kill a Mockingbird with the Radley place.
Well, that's true. That's true. That certainly that there's something odd about Boo. I mean, obviously they call him Boo for the reason.
Yes.
And the more you repeat it, the more traction it gets. I mean, and if you want to look at folkloric standpoint, I mean, that's how you end up with tulpas and things like that, to be perfectly honest.
It is. And the dry soil beneath the chinaberry trees in the backyard. I do love To Kill a Mockingbird. It's my favorite book. But
one of mine and one of my favorite movies.
Yes, and just that, and there is the strangeness of the world just beyond the reach of the mind.
Yes.
Especially from the perspective of childhood.
True. And I think a lot of these legends do grow up out of childhood and certainly adolescence and adolescent car culture.
It does. And I'm really, even as I'm saying that, I'm going, just pinpointed one. There are several, but one of the key effective key tropes of Stranger Things season 1. So, it's the kids who are seeing it all.
Yep.
And the adults aren't until it's too late. So that, and it's done quite well.
Yeah, I mean, and of course that's the premise of Scooby-Doo and so many other things as well. It's the kids have the answers.
They do, and I think that there's something very powerful about the darkness of the unknown when you're a child, and then being told that's silly, that's irrational, the world doesn't work like that. And in the back of your mind, you're saying, but I think it does, or what if it does? And for some of us, the touching of that other world doesn't diminish after adolescence.
Very true. Very true. And I'm glad it didn't for me. So
yeah, same here for me as well.
But by the same token, that's very true. But what adults have tended to do is create rituals around death that in basically serve a lot of the same purposes. And it's to keep the veil at bay.
Yes. either to disguise yourself from it, to appease it, or I don't know, what are some of the other, I think, goals of ritual?
Well, certainly that that whatever is on the other side can't come through the spirit of the departed not being trapped.
That's definitely a big one, that you want your loved ones to go on to wherever you want them to go and not get stuck and unhappy.
And that is why traditionally you covered mirrors and closed curtains and things like that at the time of death. And that is such a common question that we get, whether it's any kind of event we do. You get asked the question of, Why are they stuck? Why are ghosts stuck here?
That's a good
May-
point.
And maybe that's where that fascination or that fixation on that idea comes from, is that traditionally we did all these little things. We stopped the clock and we did this and that. So, quote, that wouldn't happen. And it seems like our minds are still fixated on that possibility.
And that almost, penitence to get your loved one out of purgatory.
Yeah.
The idea that there's something that we need to do to make peace with the dead.
Yes. Or at least keep the dead away from us. I think that's the unspoken part is for many, I think it's more, I just don't want them to bug me. And so I don't want them stuck.
And I would posit that yes, I completely agree. I think that an older, although I think it's the same subconscious motif, the same drive, that in previous generations with much more of a closeness with death and appreciation for the supernatural and the paranormal, collectively, that it was the idea of, yes, the dead are real, I want them to be over there,
not
instead of
here.
here, and not here. Thank you very much. And of course that is also coming off of that concept of the vengeful dead. You don't want them sticking around and being unhappy. Then there's certainly the Christian motif that we want them to go. We want them to go to heaven. We want them to be happy. We want them to cross over. Then that is certainly transitioned into sort of a new age concept of, we want them to go into the light, and after they're all done talking to Jennifer Love Hewitt, then they can just walk through the door and be done. And then I think in a larger sense, subconsciously or unconsciously, coming off of the post-war modernization and the sanitization and absence of death trope that isn't a trope. I mean, it's something that society actively perpetuates at this point, is the idea that death just needs to not be here.
Right. We, in a very short period of time, we went from death being in our front, in our living room, to we want as little contact with it as possible.
It is, and almost to like we've largely grown up with these new traditions of the sanitization of death, the death in hospital, the ritual being placed in a funeral home. I remember now, and there's varying levels of this. Just talking about some of my personal experiences with death in childhood, and interestingly enough, growing up, I was somewhat removed because my maternal grandparents, I was 20 before my grandmother passed, and then 26 before my grandfather passed, in that sense. So immediate family death, like someone I really knew, did not occur until I was a young adult, and I'm very happy about that. But I remember attending the funeral. It was the first funeral that I personally remember. It would have been one of my grandparents' much older nephews.
Okay.
And my grandfather was the youngest of his siblings. So consequently, this was an individual who wasn't that much different in age than he was. He was in his 70s, and a certain amount of expectation, etc. And this wasn't even someone that I remembered meeting, but it was the funeral took place in a church. There was an open casket. Everyone walked by the body to pay their respects, and there was a traditional immediacy
Mm-hmm.
that you simply could not avoid.
Yes. That, I mean, I think an open casket does that. I can't imagine. It's such an artifice to me with embalming and so forth that I
Mhm.
can't imagine what it was like pre-embalming.
Yes, yes, very visceral in all reality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then not to for whatever reason, my mind bookends this with another funeral that I attended, which is a family friend in Peoria. And certainly there
Mm-hmm.
was a sense of reality. This was someone that I knew. She was very elderly when she passed. But so first of all, I remember it'd been like my third or fourth cousin. Um, the church was full.
Mm-hmm.
This was somebody who was a part of the community. All of his family and extended family was there. I think we parked 4 or 5 blocks away from the church. That sort of thing. Um, what I would classify as a very rural, traditionalist
Mm-hmm.
experience. And with the case of our family friend in Peoria, this was it was first of all, it was vastly different. Um, the a cremation had taken place beforehand. It was in the extremely postmodern 1960s era chapel that was associated with the cemetery, which was beautiful, mostly glass with overlooking a wooded space. And you walk in, and there's maybe 4 people associated with the family.
Mm-hmm.
There's an urn, and there's 7 or 8 floral displays, and there's nothing really to suggest death.
Yeah. It is a sanitized vision.
It is, and it I I just sort of I was probably about 9 for the first one and 18 or 19 for the second one.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there had been funerals in between, but those are the 2 that really stand out as like my first, and then one that was extremely different, sort of a pre postmodern funeral, as opposed to a postmodern urban funeral, and pre post. But also, and this is where my brain goes, that's kind of creepy. Actually goes to the film Ultraviolet, where they just get rid of people and then
Yeah.
sanitize their existence and just say, oh, they're just not here anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And they're now, you might laugh at that because extremely dystopian, weird future, Mila Jovovich, so on and so forth. I think that was the one with also with a person with genetically modified claws in their feet. Anyway, but
Something like that. Yeah.
yeah, and the big weird airship in the sky that held all the data for all the world.
Mm-hmm.
But the point of intersection, the corolla, the connective tissue on this for me is that in an attempt to sanitize too much, we get to the point of simply saying, that death is, oh, they're just not here. They're just, it's like they're here, but they're not. And there's
Right.
no immensity of grief. And of course, the idea is that that's, ugly and unsightly. And if we could just not do that, that would be fine. But I think that our grief and trauma studies show that you can't.
No, it's one way or another, it comes out.
And so consequently, some of these much older traditions where death is very real and visceral and quite frankly ugly,
Mm-hmm.
and it is associated with the ritual of the dead that are quote unquote more primitive, versions of humanity may have had all of this figured out much better than we could possibly have imagined.
I agree. That there's one tradition that it's not ancient and it's going away already, that I find very amusing, and that's postmortem photography.
Yes.
Of course, photography was invented in the late 1830s in Europe and France. It started occurring in America in the 1840s, and spread, and it became a tradition to take a photo of the deceased, because often that was the only photo they would have of that person, because it was very expensive.
Yes.
And now a lot of people were very repulsed by that. Over time, that grew into a tradition when death and funerals moved out of the home into funeral homes. I think everyone has the obligatory photos of the person in the casket, and I think that directly comes out of that. And you hear more and more people when they see these kind of photos, they don't understand why would anyone do that, and that tradition is kind of going away. But I think it's the same thing. It's almost like, oh, it didn't really happen. There, there's no picture, there's no proof.
Right.
And so they're just not here.
They're just elsewhere.
And I think that is part of that change.
And I think the price that we pay for that is mounting levels of latent neuroses about death afterwards, that when we grieve appropriately, we're essentially making peace with death and the dead.
I think so. We learn to live with them, so to speak, instead of pretending that they're not there.
And I think what we can oftentimes see in this process, for example, the transition, the more that that death was a visceral reality, you also saw a culture that would go picnic in the cemetery.
Exactly. I mean, well, they were places for the living to celebrate lives of those that passed.
And I don't know, I can't prove that it's connected, but I think it's an interesting thing to consider, is that as we've seen this transition to more sanitization of death, we see mounting levels of fear or repulsion about cemeteries.
I think so, which gives rise to some of the lore, I think, that we get about haunted cemeteries and walking past a cemetery and being accosted by a ghost, that
yes,
particularly a vengeful one.
Particularly a vengeful spirit. And now, for the record, just to clear the air on this, a lot of our cemetery haunting lore certainly goes way back.
Yeah, some of it does.
But I find it interesting as potentiality that these situations, that our discomfort with death seems to mount the more we attempt to sanitize it.
I think so, in a very real way, and I think part of it does come out in the fascination with ghosts and ghost hunting, and some of the movies and so forth that are now getting sequel after sequel. Looking at you, Conjuring.
I was gonna say James Wan all the way, baby.
Yeah.
And for the record, I really like those films, but I do.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
take them, and I think this is an important point. Just to insert this, I take this as entertainment that is vastly far removed from on the ground paranormal experiences. And a lot of people, you all that I'm talking to, the public, oftentimes don't make that distinction.
That's true. Even with a based on true story situation like The Conjuring, what's in the films and everything is not what people involved in the case say happened. I mean,
Yeah.
it is vastly different, i.e. entertainment people. And and I think that's part of it. As we have sanitized ourselves from death, it's like we blur the line between what those real stories and entertainment
Right.
as well.
Right. Which, it does become folkloric. It's very expensive folklore at this point, because
Yeah.
it's heavily franchised, merchandised, etc. But then at times you see, and we see it on a regular basis, of folks then, that the public's exposure to the paranormal is this form of entertainment,
hmm
and folks then bring that, those tropes, though as part of their expectation, into haunted locations.
Yeah.
And and then I think, I don't know, I think for the mostly what I've seen, and what I've seen is a sense of relief, a sense of normalization, that they calm down, the folks calm down when they're
Yeah.
exposed to what seems to be more of a basic reality. Have you had folks being disappointed that it wasn't as terrifying as they were expecting?
Not really that. More so than anything, some are disappointed to have the curtain pulled back on their entertainment.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Particularly some of the TV shows, and different people are team A, team B, team C that we won't go into, and
Yeah.
and the ones that are much more entertainment based, and when they realize that going through investigations and events, you can see there's a letdown. They were let down by their hero.
Right. And that's understandable to a large degree.
Yeah.
Is if those entertainment / media sources are your only window into this process. A number of times when I've had the opportunity to share and or provide tour experience, etc., that individuals, often one or more of the party, one person might be super enthusiastic, and another is intrigued but afraid.
That, yes, and then occasionally you just have someone that was just dragged along.
Yes. And I remember one case in Hollister, one case actually y'all Web City, visiting with folks, and kind of giving them my perspective in terms that we're simply interacting with folks who that these, in most cases, these locations that we're in, that's quote unquote haunted, these were locations that were very important to these people.
Yeah.
And they love this space. They still do. In some cases, this is their house, so they're in. And we just have the honor of sharing this space. And in terms of their sentient energy, they may express themselves, they may not. But these people and their lives are important, and this is a way to honor them. And of course, one person I remember distinctly thanking me for calling them people.
I remember that.
And to me, that meant a lot. It really touched me. And I think that it goes a long way toward a much more, what I would think of as a much more holistic approach to all of this.
No, I agree. And it's easy to cast stones at the popular media, because they have kind of created part of this. The flip side is that they've made things more acceptable to be discussed, and so that part's good.
Yes.
And in part, the downsides in part are the limitations of the medium. There's only
Yeah.
so much that really can be done via TV, etc. Particularly when they're concerned about ratings, to be perfectly honest.
Right. Yeah. And some of it is the constraints of media, in the sense that we have 44 minutes,
Yeah,
for example, to get something together. And obviously you're not going to fill 44 minutes with, 43 minutes of dead airspace and 1 minute of an EVP.
exactly. Well,
And it is
and to come up with a narrative too.
right. And and we at the point that Dark Ozarks becomes a TV show, we may be kicking ourselves for this conversation right now, because
It's true.
we're going to be subject to the same constraints that we have X
Mhm.
number of minutes and an investigation, or an experience. We've got to put the highlights in.
Exactly. And you try to do the best way you can, and there are different approaches, and some of them work better or worse at different levels.
Exactly. Although I would reasonably posit that if it's us in that situation, there's probably less running and shouting.
Then some of them, yes, definitely. I have to, yeah, I can say I've never ran, so.
I I did once. I did at the Crescent Hotel.
Well, yeah.
I was a newbie. That was weird. Now, and I do think it's interesting. We've got two years and counting under our belt on this.
Yep.
I've gotten a number of investigations under my belt. I wouldn't classify myself as a veteran by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly it's a regular part of my life. And if anybody asks what paranormal shows do I watch, the answer is Scooby-Doo and Supernatural. I don't. I do like the Conjuring series, just because I think it's fun. But I'm predominantly a journalist, historian, and folklorist, and I don't actually watch TV.
Well, and so, I don't a lot either. And even the shows, I've watched various shows over time. And some, are better than others. But I don't actively watch any of the paranormal shows, and haven't for quite a while. Sort of a new sort of genre is actually different YouTube channels that are doing their own little thing that seem to be getting traction, particularly with younger people. And I've checked out some of those, and some of them are very over the top, that make even some of the over the top paranormal reality shows look very tame. So I suspect that over time we're going to be getting even more of a public expectation of jump scares and frights, etc., as quote reality.
Yes,
So let's hope not, but that's where it seems to be going.
it does. It really does. I am a big fan of the Ghost Facers. But I'm still team Winchester all the way. Some of you will get that reference. And when I say I watch TV or don't watch TV, I don't. I buy things on DVD and watch them on my old television and DVD player.
Yeah.
And then also binge things on YouTube, usually while I'm doing something else.
Yeah, I mean, I can vouch that's what he does. So.
Oh.
So you're not affected by the paranormal reality universe.
No, and I respect it. I respect it as an an entertainment medium that
Mhm.
has a base in real life, and I respect the people who are doing that. I just don't participate, which is
Right.
sometimes odd, I think, for some of our attendees uh,
True. And
who who do, because there's a potential expectation that I know what they're talking about and I don't.
and I've watched enough of them that yes, I know, and then ironically, I've been on a lot of those shows, and I know a lot of the people who host those shows, but I don't sit down and watch them all
Right.
the time by any means.
But you're ahead of me on that. I do. I think it's fascinating though, and I one of the things I do appreciate, although there, like anything else, there's the yin and the yang, there's the light and the dark, in terms of just emotional fallout. But something that I think is very positive is an increased normalization to be able to talk about these things, because that was
Oh
not
yeah,
the case
definitely.
not very long ago. And and still there's, you and I both have a number of times um, when someone finds out what it is that we do separately or together, and then they kind of look around to make sure
Mhm.
that nobody else is listening, and then they go, I have an experience I need to talk about.
Yeah, can I tell you a story that happened? Yeah.
Yeah.
I've had that happen so many times over the years, um and that I'm very grateful for. I mean, I've had people come up to me while I was pumping gas at the gas station because they saw a shirt I was wearing or a hoodie, for paranormal science lab, and you become the therapist, so to speak.
Yes.
And actually have found some very interesting sites, locations and stories that way. So please keep
And
doing it.
exactly. And as a kind of a crossways reference to liminal space, both psychologically, physically, and metaphysically, I think that something that paranormal researchers have inadvertently stepped into is that space of shaman, which we would call therapist.
Hmm. I think so, as well as um, therapists, as well as just a signpost of expectation and what's normal in these not normal situations.
Yes, and how to deal with them, which
Yeah.
something that I'm sure has existed since time immemorial, is that there are positive and negative shamans as well to guide you in that journey, and
Mhm.
you have to make up your own mind based on the information or the recommendations that you get.
And we hope we do a decent job at that.
We do, we try our best,
Mm.
and of course both with for example, the folks who are attending, as well as the potential sentience that is existing within the spaces, that we're approaching it with the highest amount of responsibility and accountability and respect that
Mhm.
we can. And we care about this, we care about the ghosts, we care about the historic locations, and we care about the people who are coming in to have a connective experience for an evening or a day.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, we had on our list death omens.
Yeah.
What do we want to touch on with that?
Oh, there's a lot to play with. The gamut of death omens is rather extensive.
Hmm.
Certainly, on the more extreme side is something like the black boar
Yeah. Or black hound
or black hound, the spectral animals, the spectral black animals. Um, things like glass breaking,
hmm
clocks chiming at odd times, maybe not a spectral animal, but simply an animal out of place or animals behaving strangely.
Mm-hmm.
These, there's a wide gamut of death omens. And then, and I think that this tends to be a little more apropos for certain dynastic family lines with strong ties to the other world.
Mm-hmm.
The Dark Fae, an association with the Dark Fae.
Very, very true. One, and actually while you were talking, an example came to mind was that this actually happened in my family. And that this would have been, I'm trying to think, my great aunt, I think. My great aunt and uncle had a young boy who came down with a blood poisoning, and this would have been back in the, from my understanding, I think maybe the 30s or 40s, and very ill. They couldn't do anything more for him, and the doctors were preparing them. It was probably a matter of time, and the family dog came into the bedroom, sat at the end of the bed, and howled 3 times that evening, and he passed in the night. And through the family, I was heard that, dog howling in the house was the death omen. And not just because it had happened, but that they had always heard that, and then it really did happen in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which
And
is kind of a combination of the death omens of the spectral animals and the dark fae.
It
Coming
is
together in a way.
And I think that there's something really powerful about that. In our corporeal realm, it seems very mundane. So much of it was mundane, and the moments just before death, when there are experiences like that, and many people have experiences of one kind or another that not perhaps that specifically, but echoes of this. It is a moment of touching, almost a moment of touching eternity, a moment of touching the other world, when you realize that there's much more than the mundane in which we exist. It doesn't make sense oftentimes. How would a dog know? How would these things happen? And it can leave you very shaken in the process.
Very much so, very much so. And that's certainly the description that was handed down in the family, that it was just so surreal, and that my great aunt just, I guess, fell to her knees, because in her mind he was passing that night, and ultimately he did.
Yes. And that they're the transition point of death. And I think that this is something that our modern society has, in its sanitization, has done a disservice. It has removed the dark enchantment, or attempted to remove the dark enchantment from the experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I think through time, death omens, we hear a lot of these stories in connection with war and battles. And certainly in the Ozarks as well, during the Civil War, and the spectral animals were the death omen. And we were talking beforehand, actually, about a Scottish lore spirit, the Cúnaíoch, that is very evocative of that, and a lot of these death omens almost seem to go back to. And an interesting thing with the the Kunayak is that there's a real example of when it supposedly was an omen of death, of battle, and that the appearance of the spirit had an impact.
Yes, at the Battle of Glencoe.
Yeah. Basically, the Kunayak are dark fairies that inhabit the waters, and every clan has their own, and it foretells the death of clan members and mourns those slain in battle, particularly. Again, similar but different than a banshee, because a banshee is seen and is and not connected necessarily with water, but they're very rarely seen. But again, they are usually around rivers and bodies of water, those liminal spaces that kind of go back to the bridges and things that we've talked about. And that they can't be approached or questioned, as some spirits and dark fairies are able to. But the massacre of Glencoe specifically, that the one for the MacDonald clan was heard sobbing for nights before the massacre, to the point that people in the Glen, many of them left.
Yes.
Because of the omen, and by doing so, they escaped being killed.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's something that I think, in terms of full circle with our association with death, something that death omens are highly suggestive of is something that we as a modern society really struggle with, which is the inescapability of fate.
That's true. We tell ourselves that we have free will.
Yes.
Both from a secular view, and then many religious disciplines. Some are more on the fate end, and some free will, so that you can change your fate. And it is comforting to think that you do have free will, but do we?
And it's something that I've consistently observed in terms of analysis of modern, especially merchandising culture, is, first of all, an obsession with youth, and almost to the disposability of the elderly.
Yeah.
And along with that is the idea that if you just know all the right things to do, that you just remain young. That's the goal. And it is, of course, ridiculous. And I think that, certainly from my perspective, free will is extraordinarily powerful and important, and we're individually empowered up to a point.
Yeah.
And death omens really signal where the tide has turned.
That's true. And of course, then there's always the possibility that perhaps destiny and free will exist on a spectrum, and
Yes.
But that's a little esoteric for for my brain at the moment.
Mine too. But I think that there is there's a folklore, there's a lore aspect of touching eternity that occurs with death omens that leaves one either shaken or comforted, or in some strange combination of both.
True. I mean, And while we're comforted with the idea of free will, on the other hand, destiny can be a little comforting too, because if there's destiny, then there must be meaning.
Yes. And it's a consistent tightrope walk, I think, of philosophy, of finding meaning. And I think that many of the questions that people have about the paranormal are actually ones of larger meaning.
Oh, I think so too. That really comes through when you have conversations.
Mhm.
That I think often people that they are looking for meaning, and when they have conversations with us, it's they're wanting answers.
Mhm. And perhaps answers because of an experience that they've had,
Hmm.
or because they've lost someone, um, or in good postmodern industrialized society phraseology, they've simply misplaced them. They're
They're around
somewhere.
here somewhere. They're around here
Yeah.
somewhere.
We've had no death rituals to process the grief, so I'm sure they're around here somewhere.
Just in the closet or something,
Yeah.
a dresser drawer or something.
Oh, curl up in my sock drawer and sleep for days. So,
That's how you get house elves.
oh my gosh, yes. Well, on the note of house elves, this may be a good place to transition to get ready for next week.
I think so. We appreciate everyone, and we'll be back next week with something else.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone.